Stan now considers all things, and we look to see what it means to be a well-educated person. And imagine what your life would be like if you had grown up and were just fed hot dogs and tacos and never talked to, never held, always kept indoors, never allowed to watch TV, but just sat in a room alone. Your life would be so small. Let's call such an individual with that kind of background Mr. Low Road for the moment. His metaphysics, a philosophical term meaning your worldview, his metaphysics would be very limited. What he knew about the world would consist mostly of what he knew about hot dogs and tacos. Your pet dog that you pet and talk to and run and play fetch with and the rest knows more than Mr. Low Road. He knows about loyalty. He knows about play. Now that's an extreme example. Let's take a middle road now. To hot dogs and tacos and being brought up in American society and sports on TV and kids going to the mall to go shopping. The conversations that you hear in such a world revolve much around sex or food or clothing or whatever's the latest fad. Every group has a curriculum, learning the lore of the tribe. And to what group do those middle-of-the-roaders belong? What is their curriculum in our world today? Is their tribal lore significantly different than my ancestors of 1,500 years ago who roamed the plains of Europe and had illiteracy and superstition and talked about sex and food and clothes and whatever was their latest fad? Now the middle-of-the-roaders would look at Mr. Low Road today and probably say, well, he don't know nothing. Man, he's just funny. He dresses funny. He doesn't know how to even use a charge card, nothing. To be well-educated allows us to drift away from that middle-of-the-road life. Drift away from the thinness that characterizes American culture today. We have a classical heritage that can be ours. For centuries, the middle-of-the-roaders, as I call them, have led lives deprived much of that classical culture and sort of proud of their cultural deprivation of music, their cultural deprivation of art or of history or of philosophy. But today, with easy access to books or to art or to music, there is a real opportunity for the masses of people who wish to do so to live in a much expanded world view, the view of a well-educated person. The study of history helps you step back from the narrow world you might otherwise inhabit. The 12-year-old member of the Barrio LA gang doesn't have the same worldview that a person who has read and studied a lot of history. The world looks different. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of history. Maybe not one that you would have expected me to start with. I'm going to start with the Crimean War, 1854 to 1856. That's less than 10 years before the Civil War began in 1861. So middle of last century. So far, it's boring, as the teenagers sometimes say. No. Listen for a moment. Why I chose the Crimean War. The French and the British and the Turks were on one side. They were the Allies versus the Russians. The Allies were seeking to capture the naval base at Sebastopol in the Crimea, hence the Crimean War is the name. And the naval base was one of the major bases. It was essential to Russian power essential Russian power. Then there was the collapse of the British medical services during that war. They just couldn't keep enough men there to do the nursing. Then came Florence Nightingale. You've heard that name, possibly. And she, in her efforts, opened up the profession of nursing to women during the Crimean War. Still, what's the big deal? Listen, continue. Women in nursing. Women in nursing during the Crimean War, 1854, 1856, that was the first major extension of occupational opportunity for women since the Dark Ages, when women had then the possibilities in the Dark Ages of joining religious orders. From the Dark Ages to the Crimean War, the first new job opportunity for women. Just in 1 minute's time here, a little bit of history. The Crimean War of all things. And your world is a little bit larger. Hi. Oh, you've seen that Life magazine and AIDS. No one is safe from AIDS, says the cover of Life magazine. #1 health menace. Oh, that's a Newsweek. Oh, where do you get your education from? The media like that. You watch TV? There's a book by Michael Fumento he's written recently that talks about the real science of AIDS. It is one of the least transmissible diseases known to mankind. Infinitely more transmissible than hepatitis, for example. You have to have a relatively heavy dose of bodily fluids to pass AIDS. There's the high-risk groups. You've been told about it, and it's been beat into your head forever. You know, intravenous users with sharing their needles and anal sex. Although they call it just homosexual sex, anal sex. The vagina was designed by God not to rupture during sex. A heterosexual having sex, one encounter with an individual who is not in those two high-risk groups, homosexual, needle user, sharing needles. If they're using a condom, they've got one chance in 50 million, according to the book by Michael Fumento, of contracting AIDS. If they don't use a condom, they've got one chance in 5 million. Heterosexuals have more of a chance of drowning in the bathtub. The anus, in contrast to the vagina, ruptures easily. And that's how much of AIDS is transmitted, apparently. That's the science, in contrast to the screaming articles in Life or Newsweek. I'm going to rest easy. in statistics. An educated person cannot live without working with statistics and understanding them at least a little bit. Statistics does two things. First, you describe the data that you have observed, and secondly, you predict from it. Did you ever notice that the predictions you make in everyday life from the data you have is from those summaries? You have a summary in your head. You're living in, say, western Nevada, and in the early fall, your summary is that it's in the 70s and 80s in the daytime in temperature. You don't start with all the individual data and think, well, on August 31st, it's 84. On September 1, it's 82. It's the description by the summary. And so we're going to start our statistics from the descriptive side. I sought a vacation home for my royal self. And I saw the real estate agent showed me beautiful sunny Sandinais. Ah, paradise, the agent said. Look, he said. And he showed me beautiful posters and played beautiful music. And I knew sunny Sandinais was the place I wanted to buy. But I wanted to know from that agent, what kind of neighborhood is there? So I asked about some averages in that neighborhood. Is it a poor, rundown area or a very rich area, as the kind I would wish to have? So I asked for the average family income in sunny Sandinais. And the agent said, oh, the average family income is over $80,000 a year, said he to me. Oh, wow, this is a place of luxury and of wealth, I thought to my royal self. I know how to take an average. I learned that in elementary school. In grammar school, if you wanted to average 4 and 6 and 11, those three numbers, you were taught to add them up and divide by 3. Add 4 and 6 and 11, you get 21, divide by 3, and the average is 7. That was called the mean average, M-E-A-N. That was taking the average. And so with the average family income, annual family income of over $80,000 a year, I got in the plane and then flew, and then went by boat, and then by camel, and arrived at sunny Sandinais. And what did I say? Oh, as I looked down on the plain there, oh, it looked like one of the worst slums in the world, like Tijuana's slums or Calcutta's slums. I couldn't believe it. Cardboard shacks, one after the other. And I thought to myself, how could this be? And so I jumped back on the camel and then rode the boat and then took the airplane back and went to that real estate agent and asked, $80,000 a year, how could that be? And he said to me, there are 100 families in sunny Sandinais. You saw the families, 99 families, spread out over that plain, 99 of them, and they all make $846 a year. But did you look up to the hill? He said to me. The hill on the hill. And I said, oh, yes, there was a castle up there. A castle on that hill. And that one family in that castle made, according to the agent, $7,950,000 every year. And the average then is over $80,000 a year. Oh, I despaired. The mean average, the average I was taught in elementary school, has one big flaw. One far out item of data can make the mean average very distorted. I learned my lesson about the mean average. the four horsemen of the apocalypse from the last book of the Bible, Revelation 6, when they talk of war and famine and disease. So many to choose from. Today, let's look at one of the worst disasters of all time, the Irish potato famine. In the 1840s, large numbers of people in that country in Ireland, especially in the southwest and the west, grew potatoes and lived on them almost exclusively. They didn't buy food. Little market, little trading, very little money. And the blight came. The blight. A fungus! Phytophthora infestans was its name, and it could reproduce with lightning speed. Just awaiting the right weather conditions. It's still with us, do you know? That little fungus, and we still occasionally get outbreaks when the weather is right. 5 or 6 months after the blight began in 1845, many cupboards were bare. We're not talking a can of beans left. They'd eaten everything, down to the scraps of the diseased potatoes that they could still dig out of the ground that the fungus was operating on. There had been famines before in Ireland, but this they didn't know was going to be the biggie. When the next year, 1846, came, there was hope in their hearts. The fields were working wonderfully well. But no. A Captain Man wrote, "I shall never forget the change in 1 week in August. On the first occasion on an official visit of inspection, I had passed over 32 miles, thickly studded with potato fields in full bloom. The next time, the face of the whole country was changed. The stalk remained bright green, but the leaves were all scorched black. It was the work of a night." The horrible stench. A parish priest, Father Matthew, reported wretched people sitting on their fences of their decaying gardens, wailing bitterly the destruction that left them foodless. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s, over 1 million died. You think that's just numbers? 1 million. Here's a splendid book to read. If you want to know about the potato famine and make it real so it's not just in your cupboard. Hunger. A parish priest on page 177 of that lovely, entertaining book wrote, he described a room full of dead people, a man still barely living lying in bed with his dead wife and 2 dead children, while a starving cat was eating another dead infant. Ooh. Welcome to the wonderful world of art. You ever think, why look at paintings? Why look at them? You could look at photos. They're more realistic than paintings. And in fact, why even look at photographs when you could look at the real thing right out here in nature? You know, they spend thousands of bucks to buy, or tens of thousands or millions of dollars to buy paintings some oil color dabbed on some canvas, and then they house those paintings in giant museums costing millions of dollars. Why look at sort of recreated reality when the real thing is right out the window? There's a real good answer to that question. And that answer lies not so much in art, but in philosophy. You remember what our definition of metaphysics in philosophy? It's the view of the world that one has. That's one's metaphysics. Whether the world is orderly and rational, or whether the world is insane, is mad, is irrational. Now, when I look at Disney, or when I look at Degas, I'm looking at their metaphysics. I'm looking at how they see the world. And the delight of art is seeing the world through their eyes. That's the treat. When I look at Manet, he was mid-1800s, then I look at the world through his, well, be mildly erotic eyes. Or when I look at Grunewald, who was in the early 1500s, when I look at his work, I see the devotion to a crucified Christ. Okay, folks, what metaphysics, this is the big question, does contemporary art reflect? What does the world look like through the eyes of contemporary artists? Is it a treat? Well, very quickly, I want to take you through some of the sewage. Carl Appel, A-P-P-E-L. Look at his painting. That's valued at approximately a little over $300,000 nowadays. I'm not looking at junk artists off of some beatnik row or some art studio out in the Hicks. Look at Cy Twombly's work here. That's valued at $2.2 million. What does that reflect? Or Robert Rauschenberg's. He made this with oil and pencil and fabric and a paper collage. That representation of reality through his eyes is valued today by the avant-garde at a little over $7 million. Perhaps one of the most famous paintings of this century, Pablo Picasso's, in translation, Women of Avignon. It was originally called the Avignon Brothel. And here's a part of it. Or finally, Jackson Pollock. This is 10 feet across in the original. It's called Lavender Mist. He's called also Jack the Dripper. If art reflects one's philosophy, then the philosophy reflected by modern art is scary to contemplate. StanCAT. Stan now considers all things. And there's my picture of a cat. I'm never much of a good artist. For a long time, I've had a recurring fantasy. It's a little different than the daydreams I've heard from other people who want to make $1 million or take a vacation in some warm island spot or say goodbye to some stupid job. And as far as I can remember, I've never much mentioned my fantasy among my friends or at church or certainly not in front of a television camera. Well, here goes. What would it be like, I dream, to found a university, to create a campus that is filled with trees and shaded walks, filled with the adventure of learning not just facts and more facts, but learning an understanding of the world that we all live in. filled with discovering the great treasures in art, literature, and music. The treasures that we have been left as our inheritance, where classrooms are not just lecture halls, and the teachers are not just information dispensers. Reminds me of those, I don't know if they still have them around now, the Pez candy dispensers, where you just squeeze it and out comes a little Pez and one more Pez. I don't want teachers that dispense facts that way. If you want facts, facts are much easier to understand and to get at in books than they are in lectures. Books go at your speed, and you can repeat them as often as you need. There's the place for just facts. I dream of founding a university where the classrooms would ring with laughter and where opposing views, student to teacher, could be freely expressed without fear that your grade would be lowered because you were politically incorrect, according to the teacher. Where the teachers would point out that the 4 years you were spending at this university were but an introduction to a lifelong adventure of learning, where every graduate would carry with him or her, as they graduated, lists of books of great literature that they wanted to read in the next 10 or 20 years. And that they had such good experiences with the great literature that they had encountered at this university that they would look forward to reading those things and actually do it. Where graduating students from this university would look forward to visiting places on this planet to relive the history that they had learned in their history classes, or wanting to visit the great museums to see in person the great art that they had studied. Graduates, for years and years afterwards, would look back at their days at this university with real fondness. They would smile and think of the discussions at some pizza place that they were at while they were here at this university. Discussions that went into the night, discussing Manet or Nietzsche or von Neumann. With fond memories, those graduate students would think about the time where they first took chalk into their hands in some classroom and did some explaining to the rest of the class. Their first taste of teaching. Those students would think back about the first time that they and their other college friends went and donated blood at the campus blood drive. Lifelong habits, all of these, begun. And my fantasy is to found such a university.